Hi everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Jan, also known as Sydney Plant Guy, and I love growing large aeroids indoors. Today we have a bit of a rescue mission / we're trying to get this plant onboarded into my environment. Alright, so this is a variegated Adansonii and I got this as a one-leaf cutting for my birthday. It had a little growth point, but it didn't have any new growth by the time I got it. And this nicely mottled leaf has sprouted a fully white shoot. That's one of the reasons why I really don't like buying variegated plants. I think it's just too much of a gamble. I mean, there's different types of variegation and I'm absolutely no expert at that. So I don't want to talk about variegation in general too much, but I know that with variegated albos, variegated Adansonii, for example, it really just depends on how much green and or white you've got in the stem, most likely. So if you have a look at this side of the stem is fully white. This side of the stem is fully green. So I feel like I'm just getting really unlucky and that green is not really coming through in the leaves. Ultimately, you don't want your plant to be fully white. It might look kind of fancy on the gram, but the white leaves are useless. The white leaves cannot contribute to photosynthesis, so eventually the plant is just going to die because where's it going to get all of that energy from? So I kind of I want to try and cut that plant eventually, and I'm hoping that I'm going to get the plant to reshoot into the green part, or like that when it reshoots that some of the green bits comes through as well. It's not fully white, so I haven't given up hope just yet. I don't believe the variegation would have anything to do with the light exposure in itself. I mean, if it would, explain how it has these little green specks, right? Like, I mean, the leaves are exposed in the same way. So why would one part of the leaf be green and the other part be white if the variegation is triggered by the actual light conditions? So I reckon this is just random, and I reckon I just got really unlucky. Based on this original leaf that reshot, you know, I could have gotten lucky and got a half one. I could have gotten a full green one, gotten a full white one. It's always a bit of a gamble when you're buying these variegated plants. So if you buy variegated plants, I would recommend to either buy an established plant, have a good look at the stem and make sure that the stem isn't too wide, but also make sure that there is some variegation on it. Or if you want to buy a cutting, I would recommend to wait for at least the first leaf. Now, I didn't buy this, I was gifted it, so I don't mind, you know, let's try and make the best out of it. But this one over here, this is the first leaf that it pushed out. If somebody was trying to sell me this plant with this leaf being the first one, I would definitely give it a hard no. No way is this white leaf eventually going to turn into anything good, right? I'm usually aiming for like a mottled type of variegation. I don't even like a sectoral variegation. So if you have large chunks of white and green, it looks nice, but also that sectoral, that white part is pretty useless for the plant and it's going to die quicker than the green one. So it's going to eventually look ugly. So I really like this kind of mottled look, like a little bit of white, a little bit of green, a little bit of in between. And I'm hoping I can somehow cut this plant back and get it to reshoot to give me a little bit more of a sustainable variegation. Anyway, so now that we know what I'm trying to achieve, let me talk you through how I'm trying to achieve it. Now, I don't want to take cuttings right now, because if I take a cutting of any of these 4 white leaves at the top, that cutting is just going to die. Where is it going to get any energy from? So I want to keep this plant as a whole for now, but I want to make sure that every single node already roots into moss. And then once every single node has rooted, then I'm planning on chopping between the nodes, and then I'm hoping that 1 or 2 or hopefully all of those nodes will reshoot, and I'm hoping that the reshoot has a little bit more green in it. So I'm not ready to actually cut this yet, but I want to pop it on a moss pole so that the plant can climb up that moss pole and every single node can root into the pole, in preparation for me to chop it in hopefully a month's time or so. I'm not going to give it a large moss pole because I know it's going to stay on that moss pole just for a short amount of time. I'm really just going to use the moss pole for propagation purposes, and I love using these Grow Vertical poles for that. So Grow Vertical is a local company, Sydney based, but they do ship internationally, and they basically just do these Grow Vertical poles in all sorts of sizes, shapes and colors. Now, of course, technically it's just a piece of metal mesh and a piece of plastic, but if you can't be asked to make this yourself, I think they're a great company and a small business as well. So I have a discount code. You can use Sydney Plant Guy for 10% off any Grow Vertical supports at the checkout, and I'll link the link below. Right, so I think it's a great way to support small businesses rather than getting everything just from Amazon or big box stores, right? So happy days. And also Tim, who runs the company, he's an absolute legend and has amazing plants. So one day I hope I'm going to get a little view into his greenhouse, because I would love to show you his private collection. It's pretty insane. I've chosen the smallest version of the Grow Vertical poles with a see-through plastic backing. See-through just so I can spy on the roots and I can see once all of the nodes have rooted, so I'm ready to chop it. Normally, if I would want to keep this plant on a pole for forever, I would probably stay away from see-through. While yes, it's great because you can see the roots, see-through lets a lot of light through, which means that the moss is just going to be subject to more algae buildup, which isn't necessarily harmful, but I don't necessarily know if I want to encourage that, if I can also prevent it. I usually use these slightly smaller Grow Vertical poles, and I really love that kind of mint green or sage green backing. I think that is my preferred color. I don't necessarily like decorating my apartment with plastic. So it's okay if this is facing the wall, and this green I think makes it look quite nice, but I don't necessarily like the see-through or even the darker plastics that much from an aesthetic perspective, but they are great from a functionality perspective, right? So basically it reduces the surface area of the moss, so the moss is going to dry out less quickly, and or any of the roots, instead of kind of going through the moss pole and then crawling down the outside of the moss pole, that plastic is going to funnel all of the roots back into the pot. So they are really, really good for propagation purposes. That's what I predominantly use them for. So if I want to propagate a plant while also growing it up a stake, then I think these are absolutely unbeatable. So, sorry, I'm just quickly making one up. You don't necessarily need to watch me. I mean, it's pretty much the same process. I just connect the plastic and the mesh with a few cable ties and I chuck a bit of moss in it. Done and dusted. So I'll speed it up for you. Alrighty, easy. What I also really like about these is you can easily reuse them. So once the plant is grown up, and I'll chop it and I'll remove every single node from the pole, you can just reuse it. Easy. And you can also adjust the width, right? So I could make the mesh wider or narrower, and based on the width of the mesh, the plastic will then change. So you can make it deeper but narrower, or you can make it a little bit wider and not as deep, for example. And then, you know, that depends on how much substrate it holds and so on. So you've got quite a lot of flexibility with these ones. I just honestly use them exactly the way they came, so I don't customize anything here. Okay, and another good thing is these are small enough I can actually put the clip on. So I use these clips to hang it in my IKEA cabinet later on. So because they're so small and light, I can just clip them on and put it back in my IKEA cabinet. That's where this came from as well. In relation to that algae that I mentioned earlier, I want to show you something. So this was in the IKEA cabinet, not in a planter, so just in that see-through pot. And as a result of it, you can really see how green the moss has turned from algae buildup. And that little bit where the sticker was, it's not green over there. I hope the camera can pick this up. So really, algae is just a result of, well, there being sufficient light, the moss being kept moist, and there being nutrients. So technically, algae is not a negative thing. It actually shows me that I'm giving the plant the right conditions. But obviously, you don't want it to get out of control and start getting slimy and so on. So I would prefer a darker pole, but for the propagation purposes and for the purposes of being able to spy on the actual roots, I think the see-through one is gonna, you know, suit my purposes the best, or suit my needs the best. All right, so this is currently just in moss, so I'm gonna really gently try and remove as much moss as possible because I do want to pot this up into aeroid mix. Now this plant is already compromised just purely by having to keep these white leaves alive without the white leaves being able to contribute to photosynthesis, so they can't produce any energy, they just take away energy. So this plant is already compromised. I really do not want to disturb the roots unless I absolutely have to. So I'm being really, really careful, but I don't want to have it in just moss. It can get a little soggy and too wet. I can't really control the aeration in here as well. So I think it's time for it to come out of moss, but it has rooted super well in moss. When I first got it, it didn't have many roots. It rooted really well, and it's growing, like it's pushing out a new leaf almost every week. I only got this like 6 weeks ago, and it had no leaves, and now it has 4. So about a week and a half per leaf. Considering that the leaves are full white, I honestly don't know where this plant gets all the energy from. So it's growing, it's good, but it's definitely gonna stop growing eventually. It can't keep going like that. So I'm rather gonna do something about it sooner than later. I'll just speed this up for you as well, because this is just kind of painfully slow. So the reason why I want to try and remove as much moss as possible is because moss has just a lot of water retaining capacity, and it's kind of the opposite of what I'm trying to achieve with my aeroid mix. I'm trying to keep my aeroid mix very aerated and light. So if I keep all of the moss in there, then the moss is just going to hold too much water and potentially could cause some root rot. But of course, if there's a little bit of moss left, so it's as always, it's finding a nice balance between removing enough moss to not compromise the aeration and drainage of the aeroid mix, but also not removing in so much moss that you're going to hurt the roots in the process. So I think I'm okay with this. So let's have a look at this. So it has a really decent root system, so I'm happy with that. And it also has these small aerial roots already coming out the stem. They're just begging to be giving a moss pole. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So to hold the... I don't normally need to do anything to hold the plant in place. Once the plant has grown on the moss pole, obviously the roots are going to anchor themselves into the moss, and that's what's going to connect the plant to the pole. But right now, obviously, it hasn't done that yet. So just while I pot it up, to make my life a little bit easier, I want to make sure that I hold it in place to exactly where I want the plant to be. So I just got a piece of wire that I just cut and then bent into a piece, like a little U shape. And I just use that to just pin the plant in place, just temporarily, just for now. Sometimes I also do that just to direct the plant to the part of the pole that I wanted to attach to. So sometimes I do that on an established plant already, but it doesn't have anything to do with securing the plant to the moss pole. The plant should secure itself to the moss pole. If the plant doesn't grow roots into the moss pole, it defeats the entire purpose of the moss pole. So rethink your approach if that's the case. Right, so I'm going to fill that bottom part of the pole with my aeroid mix. I have a separate video on my aeroid mix, but basically it's a lot of bark, perlite, pumice, cocoa chips, cocoa peat, sand, and a bit of charcoal. Sometimes a little bit of vermiculite as well. It changes. The ratio always changes as well. I never really do the same one. All right, let me just quickly do that. It's going to be a bit loud. Alrighty, now that I potted it up, I can remove the metal bit. I don't need this anymore. That's already it. Of course, the pot is really small. You guys know I always use really small pots. I just gave it a lot of room for roots in that moss pot. It doesn't need to grow much more roots in the pot itself. And Monsteras also don't mind being a little bit pot bound as long as I keep providing them with nutrients. So I'm extending the pot vertically rather than just giving it a larger pot. Also, as I said, this is only a temporary setup. So I'm hoping that this is just going to be on this pole for maybe 1 or 2 months, that a few roots start growing into that moss pole. And then I'm planning on chopping in between every node anyway, hoping for the plant to reshoot with a little bit more green in it. The only thing that keeps me confident that this could work is that really the back part of the stem is pretty green. If that stem was fully white, I would feel a bit demotivated to even go through all of that effort, but I feel like not all hope is lost just yet. Also, let me show you a little magic trick. I can just pick up the plant by the pole. Even though I have not connected the pole to the pot. I just popped it in there. I don't know what magical physical force is causing this, but yeah, so I can just hang this up. Of course, if you are worried about the pot falling, you could zip tie the pot to the pole as well. But yeah, I don't feel like it's needed. It works. I don't know. All right, so I'm going to give this a watering. I'll pop it back into my IKEA cabinet and I'll see you when I'm ready to chop this plant. Alrighty, and we're back. So it's been a few weeks. This plant has been living in my IKEA cabinet in the meantime, and despite the perfect conditions with like 90% humidity, constant airflow, warm temperatures, these leaves have started to go really brown, which of course is to be expected. After all, they're pure white. They're useless. They have no functionality. They can't contribute to photosynthesis. So the plant is essentially killing itself by throwing out these pure white leaves. So I'm not surprised that the plant isn't desperate to hold on to it. I'm actually surprised that it keeps growing. I'm honestly not quite sure where exactly it gets the energy from to actually grow and continue giving me new leaves. I mean, these new leaves look really beautiful while they last. But yeah, so the other thing is that you can definitely see a few roots here at the back end of that grow vertical pole, and I can see that every single node has kind of rooted into the pole. So I'm gonna just chop in between the nodes. I'll pop it back into the cabinet. I don't take it off of the pole or anything like that. I just want it to start reshooting in a few spots, and I'm hoping that one of these reshoots is not going to be full white. That is the only way for me to save this plant, and if that doesn't work, then that's it. This plant is destined to fail. So I feel like I can't really mess it up. I got nothing to lose at this stage, so I might as well give that a try. Alright, so here we've got some roots, and here we see that this plant has indeed attached to the pole. So let me just trim off some of the dark bits because they are annoying me. Look how cute it is! Oh, it could be so nice if it wasn't deadly. Anyway, okay. And now with a clean pair of scissors or knife, the internal spacing is quite short, so I'll see. I'll get in here and cut the plant. You can see that. I want to cut it into as many pieces as possible because with every cut, I'm getting the plant to reshoot in another spot. And after all, the reshoots are my only hope in getting this plant to go back, or like not to showing some green bits. All right, I feel like that top cutting wasn't super heavily rooted. One moment. Of course, the top nodes had the least time to actually root into the pole, so I'm not super confident this tip cutting is going to survive, but ultimately I don't think this whole plant is going to survive, so you know, don't have many options. So I now have the base plant down here, so that's the one with the root system inside the pot, and then 1, 2, 3 stem cuttings on the pole, and then that tip cutting. That tip cutting is very wide though, and that tip cutting has no roots in the moss pole, so that is probably going to go downhill really quickly, but I will keep you informed. Alrighty, and here we are. It's been 1 month since I chopped the plant, and then I inserted that little video earlier on where you can just see that the majority of these cutting just melted away into nothing really, really quickly, which was totally to be expected. Honestly, if a plant is fully wide, where's it going to get the energy from to stay alive? Surprisingly, the top cutting actually still somewhat survived. Obviously, the new growth point in itself, that's normally in the petiole of the old leaf, rotted within 2 days, which is not unusual. Even if this was a green plant, if you chop a plant and it goes through that amount of stress, then it's quite likely for it to abort the newest growth in favor of root health. So basically all of the cuttings died, but the base plant, so the actual plant that I got, the plant that has most of the root system, it actually reshot, as you can see over here. But again, that is very, very white. I could kind of cut it again and then wait for it to reshoot and so on. But to be really honest, I think at this stage, it's a lost battle. So what have I learned from this? Well, as I said, I didn't pay any money for this plant. It was gifted to me. So there was not really any risk involved for me. However, just maybe 2 years ago, one of these cuttings would have cost about $4,000 here in Australia. It was that rare and desirable. And if the plant is for free, or if the plant costs $4,000, doesn't change anything about the plant's DNA. This could happen to you at any time. Doesn't matter how much you paid for it. And you can give it the best conditions possible, the best products possible. If it's not in the plant's DNA to survive, it's not going to happen. And specifically those Monstera Adansonii, or the Variegated Monstera Adansonii, seem to be really, really common to revert to full green, or really common to revert to full white actually. So basically, in a nutshell, I wouldn't spend too much money on that because there's a lot of risk involved. If you really want this plant, however, and you want to mitigate the risk, definitely get an established plant. So a plant that already has a new shoot, and you can assess the variegation of the new shoot rather than assessing the variegation of the actual mother cutting. And just wait, just hold on. Like, these plants are gonna dropping in price. Like nowadays, you can get these for 150 bucks. Wouldn't you absolutely kick yourself if you would have spent $4,000 2 years ago, and now they're quite readily available, and you probably weren't really able to make any return on your investment because all your propagations turned out to be white. I much prefer growing the green version anyway because it is, it has more energy available, so it can mature better. It has much less hassle involved, and it's much more tolerant to poor conditions. Even if these leaves would be able to keep the plant alive, the leaves themselves wouldn't really last for too long, right? They need to live in perfect conditions to stay like that. And even just me touching it, it's probably going to cause them to brown really, really quickly. So to me, it's not really an enjoyable experience growing a plant like this. And if you spend a whole lot of money on a plant like this, then that obviously makes the experience even worse. However, not all hope is lost. I actually have one more trick to hopefully turn this around. And the trick is asking a friend for a cutting. Honestly, guys, there's nothing I can do about it as well. It doesn't matter how much of a green thumb you've got, or how much experience you have in growing plants, or how great your environment is that you can provide these plants with. If the plant doesn't want to live, sometimes you just have to give up and try again with a new one. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. Honestly, at the beginning of the video, I was really hopeful that I might be able to save this plant, but kind of halfway through the experiment, I realized that this is probably going to be a lost battle, but I still wanted to continue with the experiment to show you that not everything is a success. We're dealing with real life plants, they're living organisms, and living organisms can also die, and it doesn't always necessarily need to be your fault. If you enjoyed this video, I reckon you'll love my video about the green version of Monstera Adansonii. I'll link it over here for you. Like, subscribe, and leave a nice comment, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!